Happy New Year, everybody. It's 2022, and I hope that for everybody, this can be really genuinely a fantastic year. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, because we've had a terrible 2020 and a terrible 2021, and that's all due to the Johnson regime in England and other regimes around the world that are acting in lockstep together to implement the New World Order's plan for taking away our fundamental freedoms under the cover of COVID. Now, look, there was a spike in total mortality in April and May 2020. I don't deny that. That was real. But then whatever pandemic there was over and we went back to normal. And at that point, whatever measures they put in place, and I don't agree with any of the lockdown measures, mask measures, social distancing measures, etc. But whatever was put in place should have ended in May 2020, not even implemented at all. But we should have just gone back straight to normal then, and that's that, and carried on with our lives. But 3 weeks to flatten the curve has now turned into 21 months, and there's still the threat of more lockdowns in England. There are lockdowns in other places like Austria, Germany, and there are vaccine passports, which are medical apartheid. First in Israel and Lithuania, which are in a terrible state. Then again, Austria, Germany. In New York State, that is where the New World Order is pushing ahead in January. They're going to vote on some terribly totalitarian laws and regulations to make it compulsory to have injections of experimental mRNA to go to school, to go to work, and for the state to be able to remove someone from their home and put them in a hospital or another setting for however long they decide at the behest of the governor. Absolutely terrible. This is like the Bolshevik Soviet Union, where people were just removed from their homes and put into gulags for no good reason whatsoever, just on the whim of whoever wanted to oppress you and put you in jail. That's in New York. Can you believe that? Now, we don't have that in England at the moment, but for the people who think this is all over now, it is all over in terms of Omicron, in terms of COVID, because the narratives are just falling apart. This Omicron is basically a common cold. There's nobody died of it, as far as I know. A few people have died with it around the world, but not by any means as many as had died or would die of the flu every single year, or die with the flu. So the narrative is just falling apart. But if you think this is the end of this, then you're very naive, because there is obviously the plan for the Great Reset. And people who deny this and say that this is still a conspiracy theory, there's a whole book written on it by Klaus Schwab, who is in charge of the World Economic Forum, and they tell you exactly what they want to do. They want to take away our freedoms under the cover of a pandemic and put in place a new framework of digital technology which will control every aspect of our lives. And while we don't have a lockdown in England as much, they have introduced some things which are absolutely appalling. Again, we have mask mandates. Now, I don't take any notice of them, and to be honest, I haven't been bothered at all by anybody hassling me, apart from one time I went into a supermarket in London, and one of the goons on the door said to me, "You wearing a mask?" And I just walked by and I didn't take any notice at all, and he glared at me for a few seconds and but he didn't do anything about it. So, basically, nobody's really enforcing that at the moment. But it doesn't mean that somebody sometime won't decide that they're all going to be a job's worth and start to do that. We shouldn't have that regulation at all. What they've done, of course, which is absolutely deplorable and despicable, is they fired 60,000 care home workers who have not had an injection of an experimental genetic technology. And in April, beginning of April, they're going to fire another 100,000 nurses and doctors and NHS staff who haven't had an injection of experimental mRNA or chimp virus. Look, if you want to have it, it's your choice. I wouldn't recommend it for many, many reasons. One is there's been no long-term study on these experimental injections. There's huge numbers of side effects reported on the MHRA's yellow card system in the UK, the VAERS system in America, and the one the EU has. There's been huge numbers of deaths reported within 28 days of having an injection on all of these systems that I just mentioned, the yellow card system, etc. There's been so many reports of people getting blood clots and strokes and heart attacks and myocarditis and pericarditis and Bell's palsy and anaphylaxis and miscarrying babies after they'd taken one of these things. So, I really wouldn't take one myself, and I wouldn't recommend it. But it's your choice if you want to do it. But nobody should be coerced into taking one. That's our free choice. Nobody's life should be made more difficult if they choose not to undergo a medical procedure, particularly for an illness or a virus like SARS-CoV-2, which 99.9% of people survive and recover from, and the ones that sadly don't mostly have underlying health conditions and an average age of over 80. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then if I say that, I get called an anti-vaxxer. I get called a conspiracy theorist, a COVIDiot, a lunatic. Tony Blair the other day called us irresponsible idiots. Well, I wouldn't listen to anything that warmonger says. And I'm trying to be polite here because I'm on a video, but I certainly would, whatever Tony Blair says, I would certainly personally take the opposite of what he says to be the truth, and that's me being very, very polite. So, where we are here is I hope that we are going to go back to normal, and there's been so much pressure and pushback from people around the world. Freedom rallies in London have been a huge hub and centre for pushback, and that's fantastic. And I applaud and support everybody around the world. Massive rallies going on all the time in Germany, in Italy, in Austria and Australia against these New World Order controlled regimes and against their oppression and tyranny. And that will continue. Whatever they try to do, whatever these puppet regimes like the Johnson regime try to do, right now, the people en masse in millions are just going to say, no, we're not having it. We're not going to take tests. We're not going to get your digital identity vaccine passport for medical apartheid, which in the UK is called the NHS COVID app. We're not going to have it. And we're not going to shut our businesses and discriminate against people. But that's just one thing. And as it's the new year, I've just been thinking about how we got here and how I got here as well, because for most of my life I was a chemistry teacher and I was just minding my own business. I taught in schools in the UK, I taught in schools abroad, in Bosnia, in America, etc. And I was having a good time. And but there were two things that I got me actively involved in politics. So it's been about 7 years now. I got actively involved in politics, really at the start of the year 2015, coming up to the 2015 general election. I stood in that election in Camberwell and Peckham against Harriet Harman. That was my very first elections. Funny to look back and think about that. But I got involved in politics for two reasons. One was I was very concerned about the external threat to the UK from the European Union and how it was undermining democracy, undermining freedom, and taking power away from the people, first of all to the European Commission, who were then handing it on to global corporations who were basically setting the rules and setting the agenda for what goes on. And that's destroying individual working people, small and medium-sized businesses, because they're making the rules that suit them. And we didn't have a level playing field anymore. We didn't have a fair society anymore because of what the European Union was doing. And the other thing, and the other reason I got involved in politics was because of political correctness and the threat that was to the UK internally. And now that has metastasized into the whole gamut of wokery. And so, 2015, no one spoke about transgenderism, for example. It wasn't anything, nobody even mentioned it. But it's just crazy that over the last 5 or 6 years, it's become the center of discourse. And if you don't agree with the mantra that trans men are men, trans women are women, you can get cancelled and ostracized. And even lose your job for saying something that is factually not true. Trans men are women. Trans women are men. That's the fact. There are two sexes, male and female. There are not 100 genders. You can have extreme surgery, and that means you probably have gender dysphoria, which is a serious illness, a mental illness, but it doesn't mean that you've changed your sex. And if you say that, then you're often cancelled from doing anything. So, you have this crazy wokery going on. The other thing is critical race theory, the whole Black Lives Matter thing that happened and flared up after the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. And you got these police officers who've been found guilty of murder for that now. But what's that got to do with the UK? What's that got to do with Australia and Germany? It's absolutely crazy to me that one incident in America, which, by the way, similar things have happened to white people in America as well, and nobody takes any notice of that. But the whole world was flared up into this protest about institutional systemic racism, which really is not true. The UK has been accused of being institutionally racist. Sadiq Khan has made a commission to look into changing street names and taking down statues because of slavery or something, but they won't look at grooming gangs in the 21st century. So something is very, very wrong here in this country. So I got into politics to fight that, to say, let's get rid of political correctness. Let's just go and talk common sense again like we used to. Let's get out of the European Union, and make our own destiny, make our own rules, make our own laws again, which are fair for people and small and medium-sized businesses in this country. Because what most people want from a government and politicians is basically just to leave them alone. Run the public services effectively and efficiently, look after the economy, don't get us into massive, massive debt, and look after, defend the nation. Look after our borders, make sure we don't get invaded by foreign countries. Well, I mean, that's not really going to be invaded by foreign countries anymore. I think that time has gone, but we are being invaded across our borders. And instead of defending our borders from people who are coming in illegally, not just a few people, tens of thousands of people crossing the channel illegally, the government, the Tory government with the border force, seems to be actively aiding people to come in. And look at the difference between the UK and Poland. Now, Poland doesn't have a 20-metre expanse of sea between them and the next country. They just got a fence. But they can defend their country from people coming in illegally, even though they've just got a little fence there. And the border force are actively stopping people from going into Poland, as opposed to our UK border force, which is actively helping people to come in who shouldn't be coming in. Because if you're coming from France or Belgium, you're coming from a safe country, you're not a genuine refugee or asylum seeker. And the experience of Poland is, now they've stopped people from coming in. A lot of those people coming from Syria, Iraq and places are getting on planes and they're flying home to Syria and they're flying home to Iraq, and they weren't genuine refugees in the first place. And that's what we need to do in the UK. Now, I've got nothing against genuine refugees coming to the UK if this is the first safe country they come from, and they're coming from a country where their life is genuinely in danger. That's the global convention we have. But almost all of the people who are claiming asylum are not genuine refugees at the moment, and that needs to be dealt with. And that is a big issue in the country, because that leads on to effects in the housing market, it leads on to effects in school places, overuse of GP services, accident and emergency units in hospital, all because they're not set up to cope with the massive influx of people who would not normally be in the country. So we have a country now where it's like the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, you had 2 or 3 people on the ballot paper, but they were all in the same party. So you didn't have a genuine choice. And then the parliament, which was there, didn't have any power anyway. It was basically the president and then who made all the decisions, and the Politburo that made the decisions. We have a situation now in the UK where you get 4 or 5 people on the ballot paper, and they're all in different parties, but they all agree with each other and they all represent exactly the same thing. They're all following the globalist agenda. They're all following the woke agenda. They're all following the climate alarmist agenda. They all support compulsory relationships and sex education in primary schools, exposing children to grossly age inappropriate material when they should just be left alone to play with toys and train sets and footballs, etc. This is so wrong. That this is happening in our country at the moment. So that's why I set up the Heritage Party in 2020. We launched in September 2020. We stood in lots of elections in 2021, and we're growing as a party, and we'll continue to stand in elections. And I'm trying at the moment to build a team of 650 candidates so that we can stand everywhere when the next general election happens, because we need a change from the parties that we have, Tory, Labour and the other little ones, Green, Lib Dem, SNP, that just parrot exactly the same thing. We need a party that's going to establish common sense again in our country, that's going to stand for freedom and is not going to implement the Chinese Communist Party digital identity system, that stands for our nation and is going to have strong border controls and is not going to let either the EU or the UN or the World Economic Forum or the World Health Organization or the Chinese Communist Party dictate what happens in our country, but gives power back to the ordinary people of our country. We decide what happens here. This is our land. It's not for any other foreign body to tell us and dictate to us what we do in our own nation. And we also need to put families at the heart of the nation and support families again as well, because families have been so destroyed and broken. The idea of the traditional family, mother, father, bringing up their own children, is often derided in the mainstream media and by politicians of various parties. We need to put the traditional family right back at the heart of society, support it, nurture it, and honour that model of family. Because if you have strong families, you have strong children, you have good children, you have a strong and a good society. And we need to get back to that place again. So please, please, if you're going to do anything this new year, and you want to get involved in politics to make a difference, if you think that this is the area that you can get involved in to fight back against all of the terrible things that have been coming at us, from 20 different angles, please join the Heritage Party. And you can do that today just by go to our website, heritageparty.org, and it's £25 for a year's membership. If you join, you can join a local branch, a local group, and you can stand as a candidate. So I really would love more people to join, more people to become candidates, particularly for local elections coming up in May 2022. It's not very far away. Just in 4 months, there's going to be a huge number of elections, and we want candidates to stand and just represent our values, our principles, which are basically common sense. And you can see them all if you read the manifesto on our website. Thank you for listening. I've gone on for over 20 minutes. That's like I talk too much. There we go. But thanks for listening. And I wish you all a happy new year, and know that you are supported. We are many, we are strong, and we will carry on fighting the good fight. God bless you all.